Hi, everyone. I'm Ben Gonzalez, and this is TDI. Today, we're going to be talking about the upcoming hurricane season and what you need to do to get ready. And joining us today is Warning Coordination Meteorologist Paul Yura from the National Weather Service San Antonio area office. Welcome back, Paul. How you doing?
Thank you very much. It's great to be back.
Excellent. Well, the hurricane season is just a little over a week away now. And of course, we've already seen one named storm form out in the Atlantic. Is that a sign that things are going to be heating up early, or is that just a one-off?
Yeah, so we've kind of seen this occasionally. In every so often, I guess I'll say. This year it's Arthur. It actually just got kind of downgraded to a post-tropical sort of storm, so it's on its way out. I think they've even actually issued its last advisory. So it tends to happen before June 1st. Of course, June 1st is the start of the hurricane season in the Atlantic Ocean. In the Pacific, it actually already started back in May 15th, just a few days ago. But historically, no, we have not seen any sort of pattern to where, like, if we have an early storm like Arthur this year, that it will mean a much busier or active sort of season. So it's a good newsmaker, and it gets everybody excited, and we get to talk about preparedness 2 weeks early, right? But historically, it doesn't really tell us what's going to happen the rest of the season. So
that's good. So it's not a harbinger of things to come. That's good.
And hopefully not. But historically, the answer is no, it is not.
Okay. Well, what is the prediction or the forecast for this upcoming hurricane season?
Yeah, so officially, the NOAA forecast actually will come out on Thursday this week. The official forecast will come out. So what we have seen already, though, in some of the forecasts that have come out from other groups, and particularly Colorado State has been doing these sort of seasonal forecasts for decades now. And so their numbers were already out actually in April. And they are expecting a above average season, like we've kind of seen the last 4 years. We've actually been above average. So they're forecasting, I think, around 18 named storms, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Our average is typically around 12 named storms. So above average, again, that's for the entire Atlantic basin. And so it doesn't really tell us much about, is it going to be making landfall, or these storms are going to be out in the middle of the Gulf and the middle of the Atlantic? Mm-hmm. Just overall activity, they expect to be above normal. Exactly.
And we've been saying that for a couple of years now. It seems like that it's always active or above average.
Right. So we're actually in a middle of kind of an active time in a way. And so, yeah, if we're actually above average this year, then that would be kind of 5 straight years that we've been above average. So, we haven't had crazy numbers like we did back, a couple decades ago, where we got into the Greek alphabet and everything. But, and some years, even though we're above average, if there are no impactful storms on Texas or the United States, it was a good year, even though we may have had high numbers out in the middle of the Atlantic. So, you can have a really low number year, but if 2 of those are big, major landfalling hurricanes, it's still a really bad year. So, I mean, numbers are great to talk about, but overall, it's, everybody should be preparing the same or more every year.
That's a great point. It just takes one bad storm hitting Corpus or Houston, and then we say that was a really bad year for Texas.
Exactly.
Is the forecast really a way that to just remind people about being prepared?
It is. Like I said, everybody should be preparing kind of the same way, or even more the next year, regardless of whether or not we had a landfalling system or not. But it does make news. It allows us to get the word out. It gets emergency managers prepared. It gets citizens prepared. It's a good talking point, and it really is to get people to get the thought of, now we're in hurricane season, and we need to step it up, and we need to kind of expect what may be happening over the next 3 or 4 months in particular.
Yeah, it's a marker on the clock for us to.
It is. It's a good alarm clock that goes off every year. It really is. It's a good alarm clock for all of us to wake up and get going with hurricane preparedness.
And for us at the Department of Insurance, being prepared means looking at your policy, homeowners, windstorm, flood, and also doing things around the house like making that home inventory, doing any kind of mitigation projects. We always tell people that shutters are a great thing to put on windows. Is there anything that the National Weather Service wants people to do at this time when we talk about preparation?
Yeah, especially this far out, especially before the season kind of starts, getting that family preparedness plan kind of ready. What does that mean? That's kind of a term we throw out there, just like preparedness kit, right? Well, there's some good checklists on things, places like the Hurricane Center website, ready.gov website has some good checklists. And of course, the typical checklists are the batteries and the waters and the foods and medications. And now you probably have to put in masks. There's some new things now, right, that we have to kind of consider. Your insurance papers, like you just mentioned. But the preparedness plan for your family, very easily what that means is, where are you going to go? Many people may not want to be going to shelters nowadays, just for the inconvenience, just regardless of COVID-19 right now. People just don't like going to shelters, right? So check with family members that are far enough inland. What are their plans? Are they going to be on vacation at a certain point of the year? What's going on? So you have a plan of where you are going to go, and you've communicated that plan then with all of your family members. So everybody knows kind of where you're going to be. So that's kind of one of the more important things.
Boy, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about that directly, but if I don't want to end up at a shelter, I should make plans ahead of time to go somewhere else.
Right. I mean, there's some relatives that may have room. There are some relatives that maybe not want you in their house. I don't know about your family dynamic, right?
Do you have a key to somebody's house that you can go to?
Exactly. Yeah. So besides the preparedness plan, of course, is really important. What zone are you in on the coast? If you are a person that lives on the coast, each county typically has flood zones, evacuation zones, and that's really good information to get from the local county and city emergency management office. They typically have maps online that you can check what your zone is, so if you're going to be in a mandatory evacuation area. So that's a good thing to do. And then also just have a good awareness of what our weather service products mean. When they issue that hurricane watch, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. What about a storm surge warning? What does that
watch
mean?
Versus warning? I have to think about it each time I hear the word. Watch or warning? Which one is the more critical one?
No, exactly. And the weather service internally, we're trying to work on that. We've done a lot of social science sort of surveys with people, and colors to look out for, the term advisory versus watch and warning. It's not the easiest thing. We're scientists. We're trying to get the public to understand our science. And so it's always a constant workaround of what we're trying to do with that. But very easily, a watch means we're watching out. They can be issued up to 48 hours ahead of time. And then when a threat is an imminent threat, right, that's typically when the warning comes out.
And that means either evacuate or close those shutters up.
Shelter in place, hunker down, whatever you want to call it, depending on your vulnerability, basically, is what your action will then have to go.
You mentioned the COVID pandemic that we're all kind of dealing with right now. Is that going to change the way we prepare or how we recover from storms this season?
Yeah, from a personal standpoint, Joe Public
Sure.
Citizen, I'm not sure how much. From a larger preparedness perspective, like from a city or county, yes, that is complicating things, because typically when you talk about mass sheltering locations, like here in Austin, San Antonio area where I am, these are inland areas that house thousands sometimes of evacuees in big, large auditoriums, and so they're going to have to rethink, especially with social distancing, how are they going to house that many people? Can they house still people at those locations, but now they have to have the social distancing, which means
capacity changes.
The capacity is now gone down, which means are you going to have to then find new locations? So I know, just as everybody has had to kind of ramp up their operations over the last several months, those are ongoing conversations that the cities and counties are doing right now. So, for a general citizen, be aware, know that if you are going to have to evacuate, and again, that's kind of why making your own plan inland with family members, friends, whatever, may be a better sort of plan for you, just because there may be delays. They may have to test before they shelter. They may, I don't know, but the whole mask, issue, they may require masks at the shelter. So there's a lot of questions still being done, but I can guarantee you, I've been on the calls. They're trying to work it out right now, but it is a complicating factor, definitely.
Okay, so maybe count on yourself and your family if you can, and that Go kit, like we talked about. We've already been thinking kind of about emergency situations, so maybe we have supplies that we didn't have before. Think about adding the masks to the mix.
Right. Well, think about the hoarding issue that we had, before the pandemic. Now, typically before a hurricane hits, we kind of have seen that historically already. The gas issue that we had, before Harvey and all these other kind of places. So localized areas are used to that sort of shelves being cleared out of a supermarket. Now, I guess the one good instance about this is that if a hurricane is ongoing again and will impact the coast, and you'll see, very, very localized then impacts on supermarkets. Hopefully, a lot of the other supermarkets around the country, regions of the country, have been able to restock over the last several weeks, and so they can then get those goods to the stores that are being impacted the most. So even though we're all kind of experts now on when to go to the grocery store, when the crowds aren't there, and everything else, we may have to utilize that from a hurricane perspective now, and not just a COVID-19 perspective.
Hey, so we've been practicing. That's a good thing.
We have been practicing, yes.
What is let's get back to the storms a little bit. What is the main threat that we have from a hurricane? Is it the wind or is it the water that's involved?
Yeah, and it really kind of depends on where you are, to be honest. If you're obviously by a waterway, by an inlet, by a bay, by the coast, by the beach itself, typically, water is going to be that big fan, especially as the storms increase in severity, the wind speeds increase. That just means more storm surge. You're talking about, historically in Texas, Carla in 1961. You're talking about Ike. You're talking about those are 20-foot storm surges, that affected the Texas coast. Lesser storms, obviously lesser storm surge. Hurricane Harvey, 12-foot storm surge, around the Rockport area and some of those inlet bays. So, for beach-prone areas and inlet bays, obviously surge is an issue. Now, wind, regardless, especially there too, 100-mile-per-hour plus winds. You should be well prepared for that, regardless of are you by a bay or just 5 miles from the beach? You may get hit with those 100-mile-per-hour winds, regardless. When you start switching to geographic areas like Austin, San Antonio, further inland, that's where you then typically talk about the flooding issues and the inland flooding and the very large historical rain events that we've had with, 30, 40 plus inches of rain over a given 2 or 3 day time frame. So that's a whole 1 hour long talk as far as, flooding issues in Texas from tropical systems. But, flooding and the surge tend to give us the biggest number of fatalities historically from tropical systems.
The rising water is kind of the deadly aspect of these storms.
Yeah, and primarily those numbers are skewed a little bit from Katrina with all the deaths that happened in New Orleans. If you take out Katrina from the fatality numbers, inland flooding is actually the biggest killer in tropical systems. So it kind of depends on geography, depends on your vulnerability, and it depends on what storms you're talking to, because numbers can be skewed from one particular decade of storms or a particular event, like in this case.
So it really depends on the storm, where you are, but even inland we can have impacts of weather from a hurricane.
Right, because even just Tropical Storm Imelda last year was a very weak system that formed right off Houston in a day, moved inland with kind of no big fanfare, but yet 40 plus inches of rain and another massive historic flood around I-10, Beaumont, between Louisiana and Houston area. So, and some of those numbers were crazy, 30 inches in 12 hours, 30 inches of rain in 12 hours.
I remember they still had Harvey fresh in the mind, and it all that flooding kind of freaked people out on that second wave there.
Yeah. So, the one big issue there is, noticing and understanding that the impacts from a tropical system are hundreds of miles away, especially when you talk about rainfall. Now, winds, obviously, near the core of the storm, the same thing with storm surge, but tornadoes and flash flooding and inland flooding, hundreds of miles away sometimes from the center of the storm. So don't focus on land point and landfall location. but overall impacts. And that's the information you'll get from your trusted local sources of weather information.
Very good. So when we talked about the first named storm of the year, this coming early, is it true that in Texas we're looking at later in the season for the big storms or the biggest threats for us, or is that just the way it's worked out of late?
Yeah, when you look at when you talk about the named storms that have affected Texas the biggest, or the most, you're talking about historically Alicia's, Allen's, Harvey's, Dolly's, Carla's, Celia's. You do have a lot of, I would say, early alphabet storms, if that makes sense.
Okay.
A, B, C's, and D's, Beulah's, Brett's, right? That kind of a thing. Now, that doesn't mean that they always happen early in the year, because if the season is very late starting, some of those A storms are in August, right? So I will say historically, we always have sometimes something small, maybe even as early as June. We tend to not have a lot of named storms in July for some reason. They just go back historically. There's just not a lot. Strangely enough, this year, we're going to have Dolly again on the list of names.
Oh.
And of course, Dolly was back in 2008, impacted South Texas, South Padre Island.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually a July storm, one of those kind of rare July storms. But definitely August and September, or I would say the core months of Texas impact. And then as soon as October happens, even though we still have 2 months of hurricane season, October and November tend to be very quiet for Texas. The cold front's already come through, and everything kind of starts shifting off in the eastern Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic.
So even though we've seen a storm, it's not too late to start getting ready again.
Correct. Yeah, it needs to be almost a constant process, because I can guarantee you not everybody is prepared to the fullest or what they probably could be or should be. So there's always room for improvement with preparedness.
Sounds good. So we're just getting started. You can't really tell when a storm is going to come. Paul, where can people go if they want to learn more about hurricanes and just weather science in general?
Yeah, so of course, from the National Weather Service perspective, the experts for all tropical, there's the National Hurricane Center. And the best website to go to the Hurricane Center website is hurricanes.gov. It's a quick link. It'll go right to there, and you can look at all of the current information, great preparedness information too, with checklists, past archives of storms. You want to see what storms have affected your area of the coastline. There's ways of doing that too. So hurricanes.gov will take you right to the National Hurricane Center.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Paul. I appreciate your time as always.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Well, again, for most homeowners, we want you all to be looking at your policies right now. Make sure that they're appropriate and cover what you need covered. And remember that flood is generally not part of a standard homeowner's policy. You're going to need a separate flood policy for that. So take some time now, review your insurance coverage, make a home inventory so that if you do ever have to file a claim, you have that list of property ready to go. And if you have questions, visit our website at tdi.texas.gov, or you can call the helpline, which is 1-800-252-3439. So for Paul Ura, I'm Ben Gonzalez. This is TDI.